seats, please. They're ready. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Al Pierce, the director of the Ethics Center, and I want to welcome you to the 10th Ethics Lecture in a series that we organize. The inaugural lecture was in the spring of 1999, and what we tried to do is bring distinguished theorists and practitioners, both, to talk with you and to share with you their insights, their experiences, and their wisdom about ethical challenges facing the military today. In 2001, there was a major milestone in the history of this program when Bill and Carolyn Stutt, Bill is a graduate of the Naval Academy class of 1949, made a very generous contribution to the Leaders to Serve the Nation campaign, endowing one major ethics lecture every year. And Bill Stutt is with us this evening. Bill, I'd ask you to stand up and ask everyone to join me in thanking Bill for his generosity. In 2002, the Stutt Lecture was given by Michael Walzer, whose book, Just and Unjust Wars, is the most widely used text in the field. The 2003 Stutt Lecture was given by Chief Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, one of the three heroes who stopped the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. And tonight's speaker follows in that proud tradition. Traditionally, these lectures are mandatory only for those midshipmen then enrolled in NE 203, the core ethics course. But the superintendent decided that this speaker and this message are so timely and so central to your chosen profession that he wanted the entire brigade to be here this evening. And I predict that as you go back to Bancroft Hall tonight, every one of you will be very glad you were here this evening. It's a particular pleasure for me to share the stage even briefly with Lieutenant General Jim Mattis, because 10 years ago, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Mattis and I were shipmates at the National War College. Before I turn the podium over to the brigade commander, there's one story that Admiral Rempt asked me to tell about General Mattis. A couple of months ago, when I told General Krulak, the former Commandant of the Marine Corps, now the chair of the Naval Academy Board of Visitors, that we were having General Mattis speak this evening, he said, "Let me tell you a Jim Mattis story." And General Krulak said when he was Commandant of the Marine Corps every year, starting about a week before Christmas, he and his wife would bake hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Christmas cookies. And they would package them in small bundles. And then on Christmas Day, he would load his vehicle, and about 4 a.m., General Krulak would drive himself and go to every Marine guard post in the Washington, Annapolis, Baltimore area on Christmas Day and deliver a small package of Christmas cookies to whatever Marines were pulling guard duty on that day. And he said one year he had gone down to Quantico as one of his stops and delivered Christmas cookies to the Marines on guard duty. And he went into the command center and gave a package to the Lance Corporal who was on duty. And he said, "Lance Corporal, who's the officer of the day?" And the Lance Corporal said, "Sir, it's Brigadier General Mattis." And General Krulak said, no, I know who General Mattis is. I mean, who is the officer of the day today, Christmas Day?" And the Lance Corporal, feeling a little anxious, said, "Sir, it is Brigadier General Mattis." And General Krulak said about that time he spotted in a back room a cot or a daybed. And he said, "No, Lance Corporal, who slept in that bed last night?" And Lance Corporal said, "Sir, it was Brigadier General Mattis." And General Krulak said about that time General Mattis came in duty uniform with the sword. And General Krulak said, "Jim, what are you doing here on Christmas Day? Why do you have duty?" And he said General Mattis told him that the young officer who was scheduled to have duty on Christmas Day had a young family. And General Mattis decided that it was better for that officer to spend Christmas Day with his family, and so he chose to have duty on Christmas Day. And General Krulak said that's the kind of officer that Jim Mattis is. And I'd ask you to keep that story in mind as you listen to him and his message this evening. I'll ask the brigade commander to come forward now.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor tonight to introduce to you a soldier who in every way embodies the ethical dimension of our chosen profession of arms. A combat seasoned leader who has earned numerous personal decorations, including the Bronze Star with Combat V. A leader who has faced the tough ethical decisions that all of us as future military officers will someday face. He has inspired his men and women in the midst of intense combat to engage the brain before the weapon, and above all else to demonstrate chivalry, decency, and soldierly compassion for both friend and foe. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Lieutenant General Mattis via slideshow that he has showed his Marines prior to going back into conflict in Iraq, and will show us here this evening in preparation for our future role in combat.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountain should crumble to the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Remth, Admiral Haskins, for inviting me here tonight. I'll tell you honestly, young folks, you look magnificent. You ought to be in the movies. You look so good. I realize you've had a long day. I know you've got a lot of things left to do tonight, and I'll try to talk to you in a way that perhaps you get a nugget or two of information that you might be able to use. I'll talk to you for a few minutes, and then we'll throw it open to questions, and whatever questions you have, I will answer to the best of my ability. The reason I wanted to show you the slideshow was you are going to have a challenge when you leave here, because my fine young men and women, this country is at war, as alien as that may seem as you while away your leisurely days here on the banks of the Severn. I know you have so much time left to your own discretionary things that you probably at times don't realize that there's a big Navy out there, a big Marine Corps waiting for you. But the fact is, for some of you who will be graduating very, very soon, sooner than you can imagine, you'll be going in harm's way, leading people like you saw on the screen. And it's important that for a few minutes here tonight, we close the gap that always exists between a senior flag officer in the Naval Service and you, in some cases a very lowly midshipman, in three other cases not so lowly midshipman. And we try to close that gap and understand some things. First of all, while we are separated by many years in the rank and the hierarchy of the military, you and I have more in common than we have that separates us. And I say this because whether you've got 30 years in the Naval Service or more, like your Admiral and I, or you have 3 months, what we are really looking for, if we're to keep this great big experiment called America alive, and that's all it is an experiment, we need cocky, macho, unselfish, and morally very straight young men and women to lead our forces against the enemy. Now, 3 years ago, thank you, I appreciate that. 3 years ago this month, a vice admiral leaned across the table to me and he said, you know what's going to happen in Afghanistan? He said, the enemy cannot hold Mazar-e-Sharif and they'll fall back through Kabul and they'll reinforce Kandahar. And he said, one of these times, one of our bombs is going to go astray and hit a hospital or something, and then we're going to have to back off on something. He said, can you get Marines from the Pacific Fleet and the Mediterranean together, land in southern Afghanistan, and raise hell? I said, yes, I can do that. And then I walked out scratching my head, trying to figure out how I was going to do it. And as I walked out the door, I saw an old shipmate from Coronado, a SEAL, the Commodore of the SEALs, and I walked up to him. I said, what are you doing in Bahrain? He said, well, I'm trying to get into the war, and right now I got a few problems getting over there and this sort of thing. And so two shipmates shook hands on a hot night in Bahrain, and we went off to fight war together. But what was interesting was, although I never received another order from Admiral Moore other than to go into southern Afghanistan, and that's the way it'll come to you. It's not like it's going to give you 3 months to get ready, say, okay, get ready, now it's for real. It's just going to come with an admiral you'd never met before who says, I'm going to give you 6 ships and 10,000 sailors and Marines, go do it. But he did not have to ask me or tell me or caution me to keep our country's honor clean. It was something that he and I understood from our years of service. It started when we were 18 years old, and he and I had never shaken hands before in our lives. And yet right there was an unspoken agreement between the two of us that he had just told me to go in and slaughter as many of the enemy as I could find. And together with our SEAL comrades in arms, we set out to do that. And every innocent person in Afghanistan learned they had nothing to fear from us. And what a difference that was. Now, we did not realize that that enemy would collapse so easily. But you know, if you and I had some time to think about it, we probably would have figured it out. And I'll tell you why. Anybody who spent the last 5 years slapping women around for not wearing veils doesn't have a lot of manhood left in them. You know what I mean? They were real easy when you got sailors and Marines in close to these guys who'd sacrificed their honor, who'd sacrificed their manhood. When they got in close, the ferocity of our sailors and Marines was more than sufficient to kill the enemy. I'd like to come here tonight and talk in more perhaps erudite terms about conflict and conflict resolution. Your job, my fine young men and women, is to find the enemy that wants to end this experiment and kill every one of them until they're so sick of the killing, they leave us and our freedoms intact. Y'all understand where I'm coming from? I say that with a certain degree of sadness. The first time you take another human being's life is not an insignificant moment in your life. But if this country does not have cocky young men and women like you willing to sacrifice your easy college years, who are willing to commit yourself to this program here, if we don't keep you around, we need every one of you. If we can't find people like you, I assure you this enemy will take everything we hold dear. If this enemy wins, I can tell you, having been up very close and very personal with them, that not one of our ladies will ever hold a job or go to school again or drive a car. Every one of you will pray a certain way every day. When they say they want to come to America and kill all the Jews who are here, they mean every word they say. I have been around them long enough that I strongly recommend you do not patronize them. Do not think we're going to sit down over a barbecue in the backyard and settle things. I had a POW camp I was required to open in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and I used to bring everybody through, show them what we were doing. I didn't worry about it one bit. I knew I was doing the right thing, so I had no worries about what was going on in my POW camp. And I brought the imam of the Kandahar Blue Mosque in. And there the Prophet's shroud is kept, one of the most holy relics of the Islam religion. And these men in these little cages who used to look at me each day with hatred, and the ones who could speak English would talk about coming to America and raping all our wives and daughters, this sort of thing. They saw this guy come through, and he's about 6'5". So at first I looked at him real close, I thought, hey, this is the right size for Osama bin Laden, you know? Maybe I'll get him. But he was a very kind man, very compassionate man. He came through and he would stop and he'd look in each of the prisoner cages at the dozen or so folks in there. And he went through the entire camp, had over 300 prisoners. And when he got done, he looked at me and he said, you know, General, these are lost souls. They'll never be recovered. Now here's a kind, compassionate, wonderful man commenting and saying something that you and I as Americans, we don't like to hear. Nothing's ever hopeless. We can always find a way to get together. The reason I come to you with a rather sobering message tonight is I don't believe there is any reconciliation with the hard core of this enemy. None whatsoever. Your job is to serve as the guardians now. And if your job is not well done, as Plato put it many, many years ago, if you cannot hold as a windbreak against what's coming against this country, we're going to be in grave trouble. I am certain, after having dealt with these people and talked with them, that had they a nuclear weapon, we would not have 3,000 dead in New York City on 9/11. We'd have had 300,000. It is a merciless enemy, and it is up to you to stop them as far from our shores as you can get to them. It's going to be tough. It's easy to lead when things are going well. It's easy to lead on a nice night in a warm auditorium. It's easy to lead when things are going well. But what do you do when you're ordered into Fallujah before you're ready to go because you're still turning over with the 82nd Airborne Division? And once in the city, what do you do when you're ordered to halt with your Marines and sailors literally 30 feet apart, and then ordered to fall back, and you try to keep the heart and mind of your and the spirits of your young troops and keep them together? The first thing, my fine young men and women, you must make certain you know where you're coming from and what you stand for, and more importantly, what you will not tolerate. Now, do we have a couple more slides here? Going in, I wanted something to catch the Marines' attention so they knew what they were to do as they went against the enemy. And off a tombstone in Rome for a dictator, I found no better friend, go to the next slide, no worse enemy. Here's the bottom line. If they were friends, if they were neutrals, if they were innocents, we would never cross the line. We would be the best friend they ever had. You screw with us and we're going to kill you. It's that simple. And that clear dividing line kept us on the moral high ground. It kept us there. And I can give you a story. Go to the next slide. When we went back in, this is one of our Navy corpsmen holding this little girl. You can see the blood on her right arm there where one of her parents was unfortunately killed, and the corpsman is taking care of her. This is straight out of a physician's oath, by the way. If in order to kill an enemy you had to hit somebody innocent, don't take the shot. Wait another day. Don't create more enemies than you take out by some immoral act. Now let me tell you what it's like. I can do this better walking around right now. because this has always stayed with me, what happened when a French journalist, or Spanish, I'm not certain, she had an accent, she drove down to see me in Babylon at my headquarters in August a little over a year ago. And she asked to see me, and tell you the truth, I don't like talking to journalists because I always get in trouble, you know. One thing, let me tell you something never to say as an officer. Don't ever say you own a piece of Afghanistan, okay? We went in and we grabbed a piece of Afghanistan, and a journalist asked me what that meant. I said, well, it kind of means we own it, and we're going to give it back to the Afghan people. When the word came out, they left the last part off. I owned a piece of Afghanistan. Well, I don't have to initiate a salute with many people, but I think every one of them lined up to tell me that I would never make it to the top of your class intellectually, and had other comments about my capabilities, okay? So you got to be a little careful what you say to the press. So I reluctantly went out to the front gate and listened to this lady, and she didn't ask me any questions. She said, I just want to tell you something. She said, I don't like America, and I especially don't like your Marines, and we're up in Baghdad, and I'd heard about this no better friend, no worse enemy. So she said, I'll tell you right up front, I came down to write a story how you were just a bunch of Rambos, her word, a bunch of Rambos. And she said, we got down to a town called Mahmadiyah, and we pulled in, we saw Marines and vehicles jumping off and run down the street. We got out, we were watching, and she said very close to us was a young Marine down on one knee watching where an alleyway came down. And there was shouting and shooting down one street, and we stayed back from that. She said, by the way, when I eventually talked to this young man, he was 19 years old, infantryman. And all of a sudden, she looks over, and plastered up against the wall is a big old fat lady in a burqa, a gown, veil, holding the hand of a little boy about knee-high to a duck. And all this shooting going on, and they're both obviously very scared. And the Marine waved at the little kid who didn't wave back. And then there was more shooting and everything, and a guy came running down the alleyway, and she said he turned to shoot back down the alleyway. As he got down to shoot, the Marine shot him. Hit him once in the shoulder, once in the head, dropping him right there, not 15 feet away. He said the Marine kept watching, an NCO and some people came running up, and the NCO kicked the rifle away, said, good shooting. And the young Lance Corporal said, there's two people on top of the house across the street. I think they're children, but I don't know. And the NCO said, got it, and took off with his men to go over there, and once they're up on top, she said the Marine edged over to the little kid and handed him a piece of candy that he dug out of his pocket. And kids have got something in them all around the world, in different colors. They all know what candy is, okay? Unwrapped it, stuck it in his mouth. And now he'd waved to the Marine who went back on his knee watching over his buddies. A little while later, the Marine motioned to the lady that she could move on, and she moved off. And the correspondent told me as far as she could see that kid walking, he would turn around to wave at the Marine who'd just done the worst thing you could ever do in front of a child. And no matter what that little kid is ever told, he's going to remember the Marine who gave him that piece of candy and waved. Now think what that says about a 19-year-old who could discriminate. He's not in any way reluctant to shoot somebody. There's always some jerk in the world, my fine young folks, need to be shot, okay? Just the way it is. It's no big deal. And that's your job. I mean, the only thing I used to get mad at them for if they left them laying in the street. I'd say at least you could move them out of the street, you know? They say, no, we like to leave them there as a reminder to their buddies. But in his mind, he didn't suddenly have any kind of, post-traumatic stress syndrome. He understood some people need to be shot. He didn't suddenly start hating all Iraqis. That wasn't a little kid. The little kid was innocent. The old lady was innocent. And this lady said, to see this happening in front of me, she said, I thought right then, I'm going to go find whoever's in charge of these Marines. Now, I tell you, I get a lot of credit these days for things I never did. And that's an example. Because I'm not sure all the time that I've been as good as that Lance Corporal. I'll tell you that right up front. Because what will happen, this will come to you, your moral crisis will come to you, not when you're rested, not after a good day of athletics out on the field. You're going to have the flu. In my case, a couple years before I met Dr. Pierce, I came this close to murdering 2 people. This close. I had not slept for 3 days. I'd wandered off as my Marines were cleaning over a battlefield we'd just taken over, knocked out an artillery unit. And I noticed a Marine down on all fours vomiting and 2 other Marines digging with their e-tools. I walked over and a young Marine was puking his guts out, and there was a lady in pieces, nude, chopped into pieces, and they were trying to bury her. And my point to you is, at that moment, I felt so murderous about what I was seeing, I couldn't hardly see straight. I grabbed an e-tool, helped them bury the poor girl, the innocent lady, and then got them on their way. I went over and I sat down on the edge of a trench line where there's a ready bunker, and out of the ready bunker, probably 10 minutes after I sat down just cooling it, came 2 officers wearing their epaulets, obviously from that battery position. Neither one had a weapon on them, but I could have shot them easily. My Marines probably would have been quite impressed if their battalion commander had shot a couple people. And for a moment, I thought that girl was murdered and chopped into pieces in their battery position. I'm going to kill them. And I came this close to doing it. The only thing that stopped me was I don't like living a life with any regrets, and somehow my training kicked in, and they right away threw their hands up when they saw me, and so I took them prisoner. I came that close to doing it. So whether it be that you're ordered to do things with your 25,000-man division going into Fallujah as a major general, or as a lieutenant colonel, or as a lance corporal, I promise you the day will come when you are put into that situation. It's best you go through the mental gyrations now, that you know what you're going to do, and more importantly, what you're not going to do, so that you never end up in a situation where you regret what you've done. Because it's very hard to live with yourself when what you've done holds people accountable. And by the way, it turns out later these 2 officers had fled into that battery position ahead of the Marines. They had nothing to do with this girl's death. So you've got to think your way through these sorts of things, my fine young folks, because at the time you actually get there, you'd better have the process in place to keep yourself morally strong, or if you don't, it'll probably be too late. One other thing that I would tell you that we expect of you as you come out of here is that you be at the top of your game. Now, physically, you know what that means. We want you in good shape. You know how to do it. Just get on with it. Put in the miles. Put in the time in the weight room, that sort of thing. Mentally, you're going through a very rigorous program. We are very happy with what we get out of the academy, and intellectually, we are not in the least bit concerned. But your spiritual path is much more of your own choosing. And just make real sure that you don't dismiss this as something of idle interest or not that important. Because where the physical and the mental you can aspire to and kick ass on, you can sometimes put things on the spiritual level behind you, and the problem is then that we endanger our very country. I'll give you an example. I was the senior U.S. negotiator when I was ordered to fall out of Fallujah and start negotiations. And I was negotiating with people I'd rather have been shooting, to put it bluntly, because they were the enemy. And I was reminded each morning there that about this Abu Ghraib prison scandal, where we had some people some toy soldiers, some people who brought disgrace on the U.S. Army and the U.S. Armed Forces. They did not represent the U.S. military, but because of today's media focus and that sort of thing, the story was constantly in the papers, and every day I was confronted with this by their negotiators. Now, believe me, when you come out as a Navy or a Marine officer, you've got plenty of toughness to handle some punk who tries that. In the negotiations, we go right back after him, and that sort of thing. But it shows the damage that can be done to our country if one small unit, one NCO or petty officer, incorrectly guided by his coach, by his junior officer, is allowed to run rampant. De Tocqueville, a Frenchman who lived about 150 whatever years ago, back in the 1830s, wandered around America, and he wrote a very telling story about our country. In there, he said, America is going to become a great country because America is a good country. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. There is no one harsher about what those soldiers did in Abu Ghraib than your fellow sailors and Marines and soldiers on the ground in Iraq right now. No one. There was no call for it. It was a bunch of punks, is all it was. But a lack of moral fortitude cost our country greatly. If you read what happened to the French army in Algeria, the 10th Parachute Division breaks the back of the terrorists there, but does so in a way that the government falls and France is held up to scorn and ridicule around the world. You must make certain that you never do something that brings that sort of scorn or ridicule on our own country. And that does not in any way inhibit you from going after the enemy. I remember talking to my Marines as they were getting ready to go into a town called Tikrit, which was Saddam's hometown. I said, you guys ready to go? I said, oh yeah, no sweat, General. You go on, go back, sleep, whatever you generals do, we'll take care of it. I said, okay. And they said, we got this all taken care of. I said, okay. I said, why are you so confident? He said, oh, this is going to be a perfect war, General, because we just heard that the officers were up there talking to them about surrender, and they didn't want to surrender. They said they wanted to die, so it's going to be a perfect war. They want to die. We want to kill them. Let's have at it. It'll be a good fight. I thought, hey, that's a good way to look at it, you know? So they were on their way, and they're going to go nail them. That was the bottom line. Now, let me go on to slide 4, please. This is from a movie that some of you young folks like, but here's the point I would make, that there are units to me as a general, as I look across my division, where I've got a platoon that is worth a company. Now, why is one lieutenant so different that his platoon of 40 Marines and sailors is worth 160 to me? What happened there? What is it that I can draw for you as I looked across the division and saw one company that could lose its beloved company commander, Captain Rich Gannon, some of you may know who I'm talking about, could lose him in the middle of a fight as he goes down swinging trying to save a corporal's life, and both of them are machine gunned. How could that company eventually lose over 65 men killed and wounded and still continue to fight as if they were undismayed by it? A company losing 65 men out of 160. How could they do that? It comes down to the social energy of the lieutenants who were in that company. That's what it comes down to. The social energy that they infused in that company. And let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you how Rick Gannon started his way home after he was killed. That night, as the company that had been knocked back fought their way back in, collected up what prisoners they had, and loaded them up in a vehicle with their hands tied, and a Marine driver, and they couldn't afford to send many guards, put one Marine in the back end, a Lance Corporal. And remember, this is a company commander who, when I went down to see him, I'd say, how you guys doing? They'd say, oh, great, sir. We have the best company commander in the division. And one of these Lance Corporals on a dark night now gets in the back of that Humvee with 3 guys who have their hands tied and the dead company commander laying on the floor of the vehicle. And when that vehicle showed up at the battalion command post, there were still 3 live prisoners. Now that's a Marine who understands that when it's time to kill, I can kill them, and when it's time not to kill, I don't kill them. And had the officers not set that tone properly, you can end up with a tragedy. And I'll tell you, I will define a tragedy in very stark terms for you. A tragedy is when one of your beloved young sailors or Marines who will literally die to carry out your orders does something, and now you have to court-martial him. That is the last thing you ever want to do, because you failed to talk your people through it, to image them through what it's going to be like. If you do it right, if you have high expectations, if you can win the affection of your young sailors and Marines, they will win all the battles for you. You will never win one, but they will win them for you, but they will not win them for someone who is not morally strong. And the reason is when the Grim Reaper comes after you, any little chink in your armor, then everything starts working against you. Everything gets in there, and that fatal flaw will cut you down. And I know it's hard for you to believe. You're young. You still think that at the right time you'll make the right call, even if you kind of wander on the way there. It's not like that. Either you lead a disciplined life where you're young men and women of character now, or when you get into the situation that's even tougher, when you have the flu and you've been 3 days without sleep, when you've lost some of your beloved young folks, then things can really go wrong for you. So take the time now, think about it, study it, enjoy yourself, but talk about it. And enjoy yourself. You can enjoy this. You are very, very privileged to where you're going to go. Now, why would I say, as I look out over here, that you're privileged if you're going to go into a fight? And the reason is something that Admiral Stockdale, a great Navy leader from the Hanoi Hilton days, said. Because he learned things about himself that no one else gets the privilege of learning if they don't serve wearing those uniforms you wear. Why is it such an honor for me to be here tonight? There's a lot of other places I could be. There's only one other place I'd rather be. You know where that is, right? Fallujah. Tonight, Fallujah. Exactly the same place every one of you would prefer to be. Because that's what we're made of. That's what you're made of. That's what I'm made of. And that's the commitment that links us. That's why it means nothing to you or I at times what rank we wear. It means absolutely nothing. I have absolute respect for you, for the commitment you're making. But that commitment is not simply raising your hand or putting on a camouflage uniform. It's got to go deeper than that. It's got to go so deep that your fighting faith can hold when everything in you tells you that you're really not all that eager to do what you're being told to do. And you've got to do it. Because when the word comes and you got to go, you stick together, okay? Go to the next slide. Here's one point you have to make to people. You cannot allow any of your people to avoid the brutal facts. If they start living in a dream world, it's going to be bad. Now, let me tell you what it was like for the 1st Division. We finally came out of Iraq. We'd lost many, many young men. And in October, we got home. And in November, with our ship still at sea, bringing our gear back, I got word we were going back in. If you ever get into a position where what you're being asked to do or ordered to do is so tough that you don't think you can do it and fight with a happy heart, then what's going to happen is you'll sell your troops short. So you're in totus porcus when you come out of here, okay? That's Latin for whole hog, okay? You get it? Totus porcus, okay? Got it? Didn't realize Marines knew Latin, did you? Okay? That's about as high as my intellectual pretensions can take me. Go to the next slide. Now there's what men look like going into a fight with a happy heart. Those young men are going into Fallujah back in April, and they could not be happier. Now the reason they're that way is they're well trained, they're well led, and they have leaders above them whose honor is such that they're not going to let them down. So they no longer have any concerns whatsoever about what's going on in front. Look at them. Can you believe those guys are going into a fight within a few minutes? Literally within a few minutes in this case. Now, Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most articulate associate justices that our Supreme Court has ever had, could not articulate war, yet he'd been an infantry officer in the Civil War, and he would say to his fellow veterans, you and I have shared the incommunicable experience of war. My fine young midshipmen, I cannot tell you in all sorts of details what you're going to go into, but I can assure you of this. If you have the strong character that you can develop through study, through time on the athletic field, at times by going out once you're over 21 and having a good toot with your buddies. Admiral, I won't glamorize alcohol any further. But if you can enjoy the challenges that are coming your way, if you can make certain that you know no matter what comes your way in an uncertain world, you are sure of yourself and your moral standards, then bring it on. The brawl will actually be a lot of fun. You know, there's nothing better, my fine young folks, than getting shot at and missed, okay? It's really great. It's more fun than you can imagine. You know, it really feels good. So don't let the grimness of this get you down. Okay? It's not a perfect world, but America is worth fighting for on its worst day. So if you've got the guts to step across that line, as each of you have, then just go out and enjoy the brawl. Just have a damn good time. Train your men well. Go beat the crap out of people who deserve it. And when they throw down their gun, then you've won, okay? Don't apologize to anybody for it, because your moral standards are so high, and you will have been places that maybe Oliver Wendell Holmes cannot define, and maybe I cannot discuss, and maybe you won't be able to discuss it very well either. But the bottom line is, you'll have gone there and come back with your honor intact. And this experiment will move on one more generation thanks to you. Admiral Moore told me something when that Task Force 58 came out of Afghanistan before I was moved over to command the 1st Division for the attack into Iraq. He said, 30 years from now, this country's going to look back and thank all the people who are 18 to 25 right now for what they did for it, because then they'll realize just how close we came to losing it. We're not going to lose so long as we have you. I don't lose any sleep at night over the potential for failure. I cannot even spell the word. But you right now do not know how much you embolden the rest of us to see that we've got young folks like you. I mean, I've led them for a while. I've had the honor of associating with them. Now I've been gone for most of the last 3 years fighting. Think where you've been the last 3 years. And I'll tell you, there's no enemy that can stand up to you right now. None whatsoever. Between your training and your spiritual determination, there's nobody who can bring out any more initiative and aggressiveness. And those are the two qualities we want from you and your young men and women: initiative and aggressiveness. So long as we have it, then we're going to do great. Now, I'm not going to do a whole lot of learning myself here tonight, and you're going to fall asleep after a long day if we don't turn it around now and you start asking me questions. So we'll see who has the initiative and the aggressiveness to ask me the first question, and I'll tell you that if you don't ask me questions, we're just going to sit here, okay? And it's going to make a long night, so you might as well get the pain over with quickly, okay? So start asking some questions, one of you intellectuals. Gonna let me off that easy? Okay, go ahead. There we go.
Good evening, General. Thank you for coming, sir. Earlier you mentioned that if America ceases to be good, that we will cease to be great, and that losing the moral fortitude causes to lose Quantico altogether. However, in the case of Army Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, where he did not do, no one was killed, and he saved lives through using illegal interrogation methods. Is this an instance where there's a lack of moral fortitude, or should Colonel West be exonerated from court-martial because he saved lives without actually killing anyone?
Yeah, now the Colonel West, again, I've been gone for 3 years. I haven't seen the news. He was the one who fired a pistol, I think, next to the head of a man he was interrogating. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, the best response I can give to that is there are always going to be 100 reasons why you want to violate the rules. There's always 100 reasons to violate them. There's only one reason really to stick with them, and that is because you were told to. This is the Naval Service. This is the varsity. This isn't the junior varsity. This isn't the National Guard, okay? This is the Naval Service, all right? Colonel West may have had the best of intentions, but the effect of what he did, that role model, and remember, each of you is a role model as you go in front of your platoons and your divisions and this sort of thing, departments. That role model, I wonder what he would have done if one of his men was doing the same thing. And by the way, if that man, instead of firing the pistol next to the guy, decided to fire it into the ground right next to him, or decided to slap him with the pistol. Once you start down that slope, once you start negotiating with the devil, is what I call it, then you're going to have trouble. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about being nice to people. I'm talking about putting the fun back into fundamentalism, okay? You know what I mean? Like, kill the sons of bitches, okay? But once that weapon's on the ground, once it's somebody who's innocent, once it's something like that, once it's somebody who has no way to fight back anymore, then you cannot do that. You cannot cross that line. Now, if you were to tell me that his unit was going to get overrun if he hadn't done this, that they were an extremist surrounded and somebody he could only defend from two sides and he had to know which two to defend on because he didn't have enough, you could create a situation where you might be able to say, well, what do you do now, General? My fine young men and women, that's why we put you through all this school, and you're going to have to figure it out. But I would warn you that there are always some people who are ready to find the excuse for why they have to violate the rule. There's always someone who decides that's a better way to go. And how long would we have the tradition of the U.S. Navy if that's in fact what John Paul Jones and a bunch of others had done? They weren't some mythical person. They had every doubt, every concern, every personal consideration that you had. They had dealt with 100 things. What if he decided, hey, you know, the ship's sinking, people are laying here dead, let me just stop the carnage. I could make a strong argument for it, right? Once you start down that path that colonel did, John Paul Jones could have gone down that path too. Once you start rationalizing this, then I'm afraid what you're doing is you're following the devil. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some things that are not moral dilemmas. Let me tell you why I was standing watch on Christmas Day. I'd had a hell of a good toot with a friend of mine. I had a hangover. I thought I'd go down and take care of the lieutenant who had duty, you know? It wasn't anything big, okay? In other words, you don't have to make this whole world a heavy burden that you're carrying on your shoulders and saying, for crying out loud, you know, if I don't think deep all the time, you don't have to think deep either. When you have to start thinking deep to find a way around things, then your mental gyrations have gone too far. What did he really find out that saved anybody's life? I'm not sure. I will tell you that, let me find it here. Let me put it this way. A leader who starts writing his own rules for himself should be very careful about going after one of his subordinates who decide to rewrite the colonel's rules. You see what I'm driving at? Because if you take his moral example, why should we not allow other people to decide for good reason to violate the law? And it's our law. He's not violating the enemy's law. He's violating our law. So I'm not big on this sort of thing. I think it's baloney. The biggest danger to our troops in the field is not the enemy. It's the supposed leader who would destroy the spirits of our young men and women. That's the biggest danger. And how do you destroy it? How about do as I say, not as I do? So if you can tell me that colonel would have been accepting of his own men disobeying his orders, then I'll reconsider whether or not he did what was right in his mind. I think he knew what he was doing was wrong. That answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, General.
You're welcome. That's a good question. Thank you. Yes.
Sir, First Class Johnson from the Ninth Company. Sir, you mentioned journalism a few times and gave us your opinions on the reporters that you've come in contact with. And the media is playing a new and probably permanent role in day-to-day combat operations in Iraq. Just this morning, within an hour of the invasion of Fallujah, it was on CNN.com, actually. How do you see embedded reporters and live war coverage changing ethical war fighting for the next couple of days, for the next year, for the next years to come, sir?
You know, this slideshow you saw, ladies and gentlemen, started off a 3-hour brief which every sailor and Marine I had to take. I would not allow them to deploy without it. And it was my commander's intent. When it got to the media, I said, my only guidance to you is do not speculate about upcoming ops, in other words, OPSEC. But secondly, share your courage with the American people, because what you say, my fine young lance corporals, is going to go all around the world, and you're going to be speaking to the world. So if you're getting all nervous in the service, something, let one of your tougher buddies do it. Of course, you say that to Marines, they all get macho and say, I won't act like a wimp on there. So if you've taught your men well, your troops well, and they can get up and stand up and represent you. I'll give you an example. When we were pulling the division out of Fallujah, my Marines were madder than hornets, I'll tell you. They were not happy campers. And a newsman shoved a microphone like this in front of a young man, CNN, and said, basically he led the Marine right down the primrose path, said, the enemy's going to dig in, they're going to have a chance to resupply, all this and that, they're going to get ready for you, they'll be tougher. Are you worried about that? And he's a slow-talking young man from down south somewhere, and he kind of thought about it for a minute, looked at me and said, it doesn't matter, they're all going to die anyway. My point to you is, my fine young men and women, it's here, okay? The media's here. You just have to say it's going to be different than it was in my granddaddy's war. And take the media as an eminently winnable constituency. Don't have any naivete about it. They may lie and that sort of thing, but they manifest themselves one person at a time. Has one midshipman ever done anything wrong that got the Baltimore Sun to broadcast it? You know what I'm driving at here? One person does something wrong, and the 4,000 who did something right that day, it's not in there. So life is not fair. But what defines the brigade of midshipmen? That one person or the 4,000? The American people know what defines it, and they'll stick with you. Now, there are some people in the media that I won't talk with. There's one, I threatened to kick his ass if I ever saw him again, okay? And in this case, he'd written a lie. All the other media people knew he'd written a lie, and we treated the media wide open. I didn't have handlers. If they wanted to go with the unit, I said, go ahead. Nobody's going to watch you. Go down and talk to the Marines. But you better treat my men right. And this guy turned around and talked about us bulldozing houses, which was a complete lie, and linked us with Israeli tactics in the Gaza. So I went out and offered to sweep the floor with him. I was so doggone angry at him. He came back and apologized. He's written nice stories ever since, okay? So what you have to do is you have to get their respect to make certain you're telling the truth. And yes, there's a challenge of keeping OPSEC. But the embeds actually have more at stake, because if they're embedded, guess what happens if they start talking? My embeds never let me down, I'll tell you that. There are always some jerks around, and you have to deal with that. And you'll know what to do. Put them on the next helicopter out of the area. If they've really screwed a plan up, then use it to your advantage. If they've spilled the beans on an attack, continue with all the preparations. Meanwhile, use that to lure the enemy in and go off and do something else, then slaughter them that way. There's always a nice way to slaughter them, okay? That's what your job is, okay? So just figure out how to use it, okay?
Thank you very much, sir.
Sure. It's kind of like if you can't ride two horses in a circus, you got to get out. You know what I mean? At times it just infuriates you because it's free speech, but you got to try and keep the freedom of speech going, okay? Any other questions here? Yes.
Sir, First Class Thompson, 8th Company. So do you think it's allowable or maybe even necessary to demonize the enemy?
Yeah. I don't believe in demonizing the enemy, and I don't think I've done that here tonight. I don't patronize them either. When they say something, that they're going to do something, I take them at their word. I made it very, when I was negotiating with some people in Fallujah, I told them, I'm going to warn you about something here. You're going to find we're a patient country. We've backed off in good faith to try and give you a chance to straighten this problem out. But I'm going to beg with you for me. I'm going to plead with you. Do not cross us. Because if you do, the survivors were right about what we do here for 10,000 years. It's not demonizing them, and you have a very good point. I think when you demonize people, you do cross the line, because you have now lowered them as human beings. Man to man, I'm willing to enter into this brawl and fight it out. Okay? That's just accepting them for what they are, facing the brutal facts that these people who say they hate us because you go to a synagogue and you go to a mosque, but not the right mosque, and you go to a church, and you go to a church, and you go to a church, you go to a saloon on Sunday, that somehow that freedom is a reason to hate people. So I accept them for what they are, I recognize it, and I disagree strongly with demonizing the enemy. I have killed people I do not feel any hatred for whatsoever. None whatsoever.
Thanks, sir.
But that's a very good question too, because there are some people I think who think you have to hate them in order to shoot them. I don't think you do. It's just business. Other questions? Yes. Yes.
Good evening, sir. Midshipman Second Class Whittle, Third Company. You mentioned Abu Ghraib scandal. The NCOs and junior enlisted have been court-martialed or are facing court-martial, yet somehow it appears their superiors have been let off the hook. Why is that, sir?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics about the case, and what I've always found is if you look at the specifics, it's different than what you kind of, read in the newspapers. I think that we are held responsible, but at some point, you've got to cut the responsibility. Where's the right place? I don't know. I've personally been investigated twice in the last 6 months. How many of you remember a wedding party that got bombed? Remember that? Y'all remember that? That was a very good hit, by the way. Wasn't no wedding party, okay? It was a real good hit. All right? People bring it up and they investigate you. Trust me. I was a 2-star general. I had a lot of investigations on me, okay? Because our country takes very seriously any idea that we would violate the law of war or endanger innocent people without due, very, very high regard for their lives. And I have no problem with that. I slept quite well during the investigation. I knew what I'd done. Matter of fact, let me tell you one of the questions they asked, just so you can start thinking now, okay? One of the investigators had found that when the Army Special Forces officer and the Marine Intelligence officer and the assault unit leader came in and said, okay, and I can't go into the details, but we've got the intel. They found out that I made the decision in about 30 seconds, okay? Now, I'm responsible for that decision. Matter of fact, in my statement I wrote, I am wholly and singularly responsible. When asked how long I spent considering that decision, though, you know what my answer was? About 30 years. I spent 30 years getting ready for that decision I took in 30 seconds. Now, if someone on the ground in that raid had seen a lady there and had decided to shoot her, am I responsible for his action there because I authorized the raid? You see what I'm driving at? I don't know if the CO of the prison or the command general of the prison, I don't know what their role was. I will tell you, Admiral, there's no press present, is there? Okay. I will tell you I'm personally embarrassed as a flag officer that a flag officer would try to avoid any kind of culpability in the manner in which she has. But that does not equate to criminal liability by her. I don't know what she knew. And if she didn't know, then, that's tough to hold someone accountable for something that they should have either known but didn't. I don't know how you go there. But it's a good question. At what point do you cut it off? In the Naval Service, we have it pretty easy, The CO of the ship generally, right? You run the ship aground, that's it, right? It's not as cut and dried, I think, in some of the other services as the Naval Service, which holds accountability as one of its strongest hallmarks. Does that answer your question, or am I kind of dancing around it?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, any other questions, folks? I know you've got some studying to do and you need to get some sleep. Okay. Then I think, thank you for the evening here with you. I hope you got some nugget out of this. I will tell you that I look forward to serving with you. I hope that we have an opportunity to do so. I think that right now I can just tell you, hang in there. I know it's a tough program. I know it's tough in a number of ways. We need every single one of you, and we need you at the top of your game when you come out. And this war is still going to be going on. So God bless you, and thanks for your commitment.
Sir, on behalf of the Brigade of Midshipmen and the entire Naval Academy family, we'd like to thank you with these small gifts for your inspirational words tonight and for coming here and sharing your busy time.
Hey, thank you very much. You know, the difference between being a lieutenant and a lieutenant general, they always give you things when you come to talk, you know? So if you get the chance to be an admiral or general, I really recommend you take it. It's a heck of a lot of fun. Thank you. There's another gift here, too. What's this one?
Yes, sir. Please remain standing for the singing of Navy Blue and Gold.